Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Ursino, and I'm an associate here at Thompson Hine, and I'm in the Corporate Transactions and Securities Group. It's echoing. We'd like to welcome you all here to our event today, the Madoff Legacy and the Rise of Digital Ponzi Schemes. Before we get started introducing our panelists, I want to make a note that we are going to save time towards the end of the program for questions and answers. So if you're in the room, just raise your hand. If you are joining us virtually, there should be a question, and we'll take a look at it and hopefully answer it. So now I'm going to start introducing our panelists. So first we have Nicholas Bentivoglio. He's a financial strategist and technologist with expertise in both traditional finance and decentralized finance. He has almost 2 decades of experience across capital markets, structured finance, and crypto asset analysis and management. He's the co-founder and CEO of AstraBit, which is a platform for automated crypto trading, portfolio management, and staking that connects to both centralized and decentralized exchanges. As CEO, he leads AstraBit's vision and execution of institutional-grade strategies, protocol integrations, and capital deployment within the rapidly evolving Web3 ecosystem. Next, we have Richard Behar, who is an investigative journalist. Since 2012, he's been the contributing editor of investigations for Forbes. He's been on the staffs of Forbes, Time, and Fortune. His work has also been featured on BBC, CNN, PBS, and Fast Company magazine. He's also the author of the book Madoff, The Final Word, which provides a comprehensive account of Bernie Madoff's $68 billion Ponzi scheme and was based on extensive research and interviews of hundreds of individuals involved, including regulators, investors, family members, and of course, Madoff himself. Ernie's bio is short and sweet. He is a partner at Thompson Hine in the business, litigation, and investment management groups. And that's all you're going to get. So to start off this discussion, Rich wanted to share an audio clip from his access to Madoff while he was in prison.
Everybody, has very selective memory. Everybody is, just only wants to think about, what I did to them. No one wants to take any blame that their greed contributed to this. All of these people push themselves on me. I did everything I could other than just say, listen, I'm committing a fraud, so don't give me any money. I told them, don't invest more than half your money. And, so of course people would say, well, yeah, but if you told me that it was a fraud, I never would have done it. And that's true, certainly, but that doesn't alter the fact that now these people are acting as though they're all on, welfare and they have nothing to eat. And when, people came to me because they said, listen, I'm tired of investing in the market. I never make any money. I always lose money. La-di-da-di-da.
So la-di-da-di-da.
And therapists have been trying ever since. I actually... Morning. And my antidote was everything. It's that position. Okay. Hello? Okay. Well, I'll just sum up really quickly my findings. I only spent 15 years working on the book. I told Arthur Levitt, the former SEC chairman, that Bernie and I are apparently in prison together for life. So what I was able to find, and some things take a long time, and I won't go into why, but I was able to determine that the fraud began pretty much from the beginning, the early 60s. He began on Wall Street in 1960. That made it a half-century long fraud. The lengthiest, greatest, biggest in history. No. Who knows what's out there that we don't know or didn't know? And that 68 billion is 100 billion today's money, more or less. So I was also able to determine that there was family complicity and wrongdoing in all different levels. And I won't share much because I want you to read the book. But just as a couple of examples, there was a shredding party that the family had when the SEC sent a letter in 2005 requesting certain documents and emails from people, including the Madoffs. And all the emails were gathered and given to each family member to get rid of the problematic ones. And the problematic ones were defined as anything that could kind of connect the so-called legit broker-dealer business with the investment advisory business. You also had Ruth, who FBI agents told me they nicknamed Ruthie Books, like a mob nickname, because she actually reconciled the Ponzi checking account at Chase for decades, even though she told 60 Minutes, one of her rare interviews, that she only worked at the company for 2 years in the early 1960s. So that was a lie. What else? Chase Bank, no less than 12 bankers that ignored clear clues that it was a fraud. And no one was indicted. I managed to find the one compliance official who came very close to being indicted. And I go into why that's so and why it didn't happen. Let's see. I had great access to Bernie, hundreds of emails for what that's worth, 50 phone calls, most tape recorded, 3 prison visits. I got pretty tired of them. And let's see, I'll move on. I also take the position, and Ernie, if you want to talk about it, you will. Ernie's a former SEC attorney who was on the lengthiest Ponzi case before Madoff was arrested, Dennis Helliwell in the 90s. Nobody seems to remember. I don't think anything was written about him through the whole Madoff years after Madoff's arrest, but I did a lengthy fortune expose in the 90s. And you'll talk about that as to why, because I think the SEC got way too much blame. And I agree with Ernie's position. First of all, the SEC's mandate is not to protect people from stupid investments. But we can get into that. Keep in mind that not one investor in the 50-year fraud ever contacted the feds or the SEC. And that's usually how these things are found out. I just want to call out Bart Schwartz and 2 feds here, former feds. Bart Schwartz, former federal prosecutor, who, as a receiver, got $2 billion back to Madoff losers. And Wes Wong, former FBI agent back there, is a hero. He did so many scams that he investigated of organized crime. He also was the guy who carried the father out of the World Trade Center building as it was falling, you may remember. I just have to always say that. Okay.
Well, given everything that you just discussed, Rich, what lessons from Madoff's structure and deception still resonate most in the context of digital assets and crypto markets today?
I have no idea. No, I'm just kidding. I think what resonates, first of all, is the due diligence that just doesn't get done. Didn't get done then, didn't get done now. At the time of the Bernie book, I asked one of the investigative firms that I know, Nardello and Company, and they said a firm could have spent $5,000-$10,000 to ask us for a backgrounder on Madoff. And he said, here's what we would have found. We wouldn't have found a Ponzi, but we would have found these particular things that raise a lot of questions. And that's in the book. And someone from FTI's here, yeah? Someone from FTI? FTI could have been hired, any of these firms, and they would have done it. And that's just not done. And I don't think that's done much today either. So that resonates. I think I mean, to me, that's the main thing. And then, there are parallels and differences that I could go on forever with in terms of digital versus Bernie. Yeah.
Yeah, Nick, any thoughts? Ernie?
Well, I've made notes because Ernie has never accused me of being short for a word. So in my attempt to be summary, I've made notes. I think the main point here in the parallels is really opacity masquerading as genius. Right? We saw that with Bernie Madoff. Everyone's like, oh, he was a genius investor. We can't tell you what he's doing. And that same colliginous structure exists in the digital asset space as well, in the sense that we've just substituted an investment genius for a technological genius, right? So, but the main, I think, problem, and I agree with Richard's assessment that they're losers, is that it actually speaks to a more prolific problem, and that is they operate on human psychology, right? If people weren't so willing to accept that they can get something for nothing, high returns with no risk, then they wouldn't make stupid investment decisions, right? One of the first things we're all taught in finance is you are compensated for the risk you take, right? There's no such thing. I mean, other than if you're investing in the risk-free asset, the US government treasury. But even that's not risk-free anymore and hasn't been for a while. But this idea that you're building an empire on predictability and creating an illusion of safety. And that, I think, is compounded further with the lie of transparency, right? So everybody talks about the blockchain and how transparent, and it's a public ledger. Okay, great. How many of you know how to read that public ledger? I mean, don't kill me in the rush, right? Nobody. And so what we see is a substitution of Bernie's, secret for an open source thing where nobody understands what it is. And I can bamboozle anyone in this room with a series of words. I could talk about smart contracts, and you have probably not. How many of you know what a smart contract is? One. There we go. How many understand the nature of programmatic logic in the sense of and applying that in zero knowledge proofs? Do any of you know what a ZK proof is? It's actually really simple, and we'll get to it later. But this is the point I'm trying to make, right? No, I'm not calling you stupid, and I apologize if I made that inference.
No.
But, well, there's always an exception to the rule, Ernie. But in truth, that's all that's happened, right? There's this illusion of transparency because everyone calls it a public ledger, but the same promises are being made, just in a different way. So I think that really speaks to the actual modern era. There's this idea that as long as you tell people you're going to commit the crime, it's okay. Suddenly it's no longer criminal. And I won't make any examples here, but that, I think, it speaks to a much bigger problem. And we can correct the scaffolding of crypto. We can program serious logic into smart contracts. There are issues with the technology as it currently stands, but it can be done, and it will be solved for by people far more intelligent than me in the future. But we can't reprogram humanity. We can't program their rush to believe that they can achieve windfall returns on no risk whatsoever.
Yeah, it's time immemorial.
Yeah, it is.
Since the beginning of time,
yeah,
these frauds have existed. One thing I'm struck by, you mentioned some phrases and terms that we don't know and I don't know, but a similarity between Bernie and the current digital Ponzi era is that when you've got some cool sounding names and complex jargon, it really entices people. I mean, Bernie had a split strike convergence strategy, which just sounds amazing. And people heard that and said, great, I'm in. And I think with crypto, and you know this better, you basically trap customers, the fraudsters, with sophisticated words like blockchain, algorithmic trading bots, volatility software, a smart contract, without understanding, the risks involved. we're using AI to generate returns, you know, and that entices.
And it hallucinates half of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to go back to something that you said, Nick, and we had previously discussed this, but the psychology of it all. And you had made a comment earlier about the younger generation, as opposed to, you know, with Madoff, it was more of an older generation. And now with social media, all of these charismatic people coming onto social media, going on podcasts, talking. I want you to like tell me a little bit more about that. I think that's.
I feel like we're trespassing into another question here, Alex,
we are.
But, so look, yes, I mean, it's no different than any other Ponzi, right? Bernie had his feeder funds. The crypto industry has its social media influencers. And there's no disclosure, right? Let's examine the social media influencer for starters, right? They don't tell everyone that they've been gifted or paid in the token that they're promoting. And then the moment everybody starts to jump on board, I mean, it's your classic pump and dump scheme. There's nothing new about it. There's nothing, you know, ostensibly special about it. It's just done on a public ledger. It's just done in blockchain. And I think that's something we should really address today, is this bamboozlement of people with, you know, jargon. But I think, let me speak first to the human psychology, because you really have a double whammy in crypto, right? So in Madoff's case, there was if you mention his anything, he'll kick you out and you can't be part of it. So there's the FOMO, the fear of missing out, the fear of not being able to be part of something that profitable. We have all of that in crypto, but we have one other thing that makes it a fertile soil for Ponzi schemes. And that is, people are terrified of being thought of as stupid. And nobody wants to be thought of as a Luddite, the person who's behind the curve. Everybody wants to be able to sit at a dinner table and impress all their crazy aunts and uncles at Thanksgiving, their wild knowledge of technology. Everybody wants to be the first person to have the new iPhone. So that actually is a steroid into the overall crypto industry, in the sense that you couple the fear of missing out with the fear of the terror of being thought of as stupid or inherently out of touch, right? And so I'm not sure if it's really applicable to the new generation, and perhaps this does actually seriously trespass on the answer to another question, but I think it's important to address. It's why did blockchain come about to begin with? And really, it's an allergic reaction to legacy finance, where people have not been able to participate in a meaningful way. They've been locked out, or they've been taken advantage of, like the Madoff losers, as Richard calls them. And what's happened is there is a serious distrust. And so they've decided to create their own solution. And boy, have they ever. Hundreds of billions of dollars are transacted in what is effectively an entire shadow banking industry without any regulation whatsoever. This occurred. And for the, you know, they say at first they laugh at you, then they...
In a very short period of time.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's the internet for you.
Yeah.
But it's a very fractured, balkanized space. And if you look at history, you know, if you look at politics, you look at Turkey, you look at Spain, you know, the Basque region, and you look at decentralized governance in any serious way, it never works. But for some reason, this seems to be working. And this is where we'll get into the zero knowledge proofs and things like that, because the question is, how do we solve for this in a technological way? Because atavistic regulation is not the answer. You cannot apply yesteryear's ideas to today's technology, and that technology will continue to evolve. So it has to be a dynamic evolution and collaboration between the serious players and the regulators. Now, with regards to why people are rushing to this technology, which I think feeds the whole Ponzi scheme, makes it much easier to do. And just for the record, I found out this morning that my business partner, who is very, very technologically literate, exceedingly so, his brother-in-law's father was part of this new, he just lost $400,000 because of the Coinbase thing today. Yeah. So it can take anyone. My own business partner, the reason we started AstraBit is because he had $150,000 stolen from him. But it wasn't a Ponzi scheme. He didn't fall for that. It was a different matter altogether with another bot trading platform. We can talk about that another time. But look, let's look at the psychology of it here. You've got an entire, in fact, two generations, millennials and Gen Z, who literally lived through the single greatest financial collapse and crisis since the Great Depression. They watched their parents lose their homes. And so they've become innately distrustful of the legacy financial system. And so that's why they're all starving for a better solution. Now, I also feel like I need to play a bit of devil's advocate here. I think the technology is brilliant. It really is. And I think it will be the future. And I think the longer the legacy financial institutions take to adopt it, the more likely they will be to be eclipsed by it. But we have to respect the fact that a lot of the people that are engaging both in the Ponzi's and the victims of it are people who witnessed the legacy. And it still goes on in legacy finance today. Look at the Wells Fargo situation where they opened up $5 billion worth of accounts. What happened to any of those bankers? What happened to any of the bankers in the financial? And I don't want to engage in whataboutism, but it's critically important. You know, we talk about, CZ, and I do not support the pardoning of CZ in any way, shape, or form. But in fairness, HSBC to this day still launders money for Russian oligarchs through Cyprus, to the best of my knowledge. My attorney on my right here is probably shaking in terror.
Exactly. I think we want to back off.
Yeah, and I'm
sorry. But bringing the HSBC does bring me back to Hellawell, which was the bank that was involved in Hellawell. So it's still happening. I do want to just add to something that you both were saying. But first, in the interest of full and fair disclosure, I represented Bernie Madoff's sister and brother-in-law and their family in both the receiver's investigation as well as the SEC investigation. Wonderful people, very sad situation. As some may know, a couple of years ago around the holidays, they both committed suicide. And it was just a devastating thing. This was an oral surgeon, a very well-known oral surgeon. His brother-in-law, Bernie's brother-in-law out in Long Island, had just sold his practice. And where did he put all his money? With Bernie. And of course, it was seized by the receiver, by the government. And ultimately, we negotiated. And they were fortunate because Sandra, who was Bernie's sister, actually had bought a annuity outside of Bernie. She just wanted to have something else. And that's what they lived on for their remaining years. And they got older and they unfortunately got a little sicker and they just did not want to be a burden on their family. And ultimately, sadly, took their own lives. It was devastating. And it was devastating to me too, because I had represented just lovely, lovely people, really lovely. He had mentioned, Dr. Wiener had mentioned that he was Bernie's first customer. He was Bernie's first customer. And it goes back to something that both Nick and Rich mentioned. I knew a lot of the players in the Madoff situation, both on the street as well as at the SEC. And I'll talk about some of those SEC contacts. One client of mine in particular, he owned a very small firm on the New York Stock Exchange. He owned a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. He had been a client for 10 years. And he lived in Long Island with not too far from Bernie and Ruth. And him and his wife used to go to dinner with Ruth and Bernie all the time, on Long Island. And, being on the street, he knew what Bernie was saying. I chuckled a little bit when Rich was talking about the strategy. Because Harvey, my client, actually at one dinner, Bernie was pontificating on how great he was, which he was tended to sometimes do, especially to people in the industry. And Harvey looked at Bernie and he described this to me later and he goes, Bernie, come on now. we've all used this strategy. It works for a few months, and then you can't make money. And that like took Bernie back, and he didn't really know how to respond other than, no, I've gotten it down. I know what I'm doing. And, there was a questioning, and they, of course, he told me about how they what do you call it? It's a really funny story. It's actually kind of humorous, really funny story. The reason why they came apart and they broke off contact and everything was because Bernie wanted Harvey to fly into the city with him on a helicopter, and as Bernie would do, and Harvey was petrified of helicopters, wouldn't get on the helicopter, so that's how they sort of like were no longer together. But it goes to this idea, this thought process that they try to do this, and like when they're confronted, they're kind of like they don't know what to do. And to add to what Nick was saying, it's what I've always told people when they don't understand something. It's just ask the question. Like, I'm famous for saying to people, I have no clue what you're talking about. Okay. And if someone says, well, then I'm not going to do business with you. That's okay. Don't do business with me. Then that's the way it is. And Nick, what you were saying is so important. Don't be intimidated by the fancy language. Don't be intimidated by the technology. It's really one of those things where you just have to push back and say, maybe it's for some of you who watch, TV from the 70s, the old Columbo TV show. Let me just ask you one more question.
Ooh, you're dating yourself.
I know. I got a haircut to cut all the grays out.
It didn't work. But that's okay.
I know. I told you to dye your beard before you came.
It's the only thing that gives me the illusion of
one of the things, I'm sorry. One of the things you mentioned like the legacy of Madoff and now digital crypto, and I'm so struck by, the greatest known, lengthiest known fraud in history was so low tech.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Bernie, first of all, investors weren't allowed to go online and see how their accounts are doing. They weren't allowed to email the people handling their stuff at the company. It was unbelievable. And Bernie himself told me the joke at the company is, I don't even know how to turn on a computer. Well, who's doing the trading? I mean, that's a whole nother area. The family knew he wasn't trading. Nobody was trading. But now you've got a world where everything's lightning fast. The high tech is unbelievable. And there's so much pressure for people to invest quickly.
Very
like,
quickly.
Got 30 days, you got to move. The FBI not long ago had a campaign called Take a Beat that they were pushing out to investors. Just take a beat, take a breath, and don't rush into these things. But that's part of the strategy.
Well, the only other example of how quickly crypto and digital asset Ponzi schemes are happening actually dates back about maybe 500 years. The great tulip crisis, the tulip bulb crisis. And there, of course, they were saying, well, if you don't buy the tulip bulbs now, they're going to die. You know what I'm saying? And that's sort of the thing that's happening now with digital assets. When you see these Ponzi schemes, what they're doing is that they're saying, if you don't do this right now, you're going to lose the opportunity.
Yeah.
You're going to lose the opportunity. I will say one thing. Just like everything else, okay, this is a portion of the business. It is not the entire business, okay? And that's why I was trying to stop Nick from doing that. Yeah. This is, and look, with the current administration, we'll talk more about like what they're doing in a little bit, but I will tell you that they are still bringing cases based upon fraud in the crypto industry, primarily involving these things like Ponzi schemes. And there was one that was just brought a couple of weeks ago involving, I believe it was $50 million, where someone had been saying to investors, invest in this thing. Allison.
Yeah. So going off of that, Nick, as someone who's building legitimate ventures in the crypto ecosystem, how do responsible actors distinguish themselves from bad players and earn investor confidence in a kind of skeptical market?
That's a very good question. So in a very opaque world, what becomes the competitive edge? Transparency, right? So if we look at the digital asset space, which, like I said, was designed as an allergic reaction to the imposition of so many regulations on people's lives, we also need to then say, well, if it is this opaque infrastructure, what becomes the competitive advantage? And this is where I wanted to bring up your Aunt Adele. And the reason, it's pivotal because...
Leave her alone.
Yeah.
She is a nice little.
I'm sure. But one of the things you said in your book, Richard, and I don't want to divulge too much, I don't want to ruin it for anyone, is when she was asked why didn't she invest with a regular investment advisor, she said, no, they're all ripping me off.
Yes.
So she was utterly
And
convinced.
Bernie made that point also.
Yeah.
Everyone came to him, I can't make money in the market. And she said the same thing. I said, but Bernie wasn't. You were involved in 1992 when the feeder into Bernie was banned by the SEC for being unregistered. Did you know that? She said, no, but I wouldn't have cared. Who cares, registered or not? I mean, this is part of the problem.
It is.
Part of the problem.
And so to answer your question, one of the steps we're taking, obviously, is registration. And as Ernie, I'm sure, I give you permission to give a little bit of information on it, but we've been ridiculous in what we've disclosed to FINRA. It's just voluminous in our disclosures with them, to the point where they've even said stop, or words to that effect.
No, actually, those were.
Yeah.
And of course, after I had told them, I had already cut it down by 100.
That's right. Ernie, yeah, exactly. So, but in a world of darkness, I hate to be so, God, this sounds so cliche, and writers hate cliche. But in a world of darkness, the light is the competitive advantage, right? So being transparent, and more importantly, taking accountability. And this is huge. This is critical. And I think it speaks to why people don't trust the regulators, because they're impotent. Name me one banker that went to prison for the 2008 financial crisis. Name me one banker that went to prison for rigging the LIBOR. Name me a banker from Wells Fargo that went to prison for making up fraudulent accounts in people's names and making $5 billion off it. So fraud is baked into the legacy system, right? If I told you, oh, you can make $20 billion and then the SEC will come along and find you $2 billion. Well, shit, sign me up. Pardon my French, by the way. I'll take $18 billion any day. Anyone want to join me in that?
Sometimes the banks like Chase signed a deferred prosecution
That's right.
agreement and agreed to all these reforms.
Yeah, but then they don't get implemented.
Well, that's a good question. What's been implemented?
And I don't want to pick on the banks. But
Chase has 250,000 employees. It's like the city of St. Louis. It's an IT problem. How do you organize that? How do you...
Well, before we throw the entire system under the bus, okay?
My system's being thrown under the bus. I just feel like...
I understand. Let's also, I think part of the 2008 debacle was, by the way, the president of the Bank of Ireland, I think, went to jail. And
but not in the United States.
No, not in the United States. I think.
Let me clarify. Name an American bank.
Yeah, okay. I think part of the issue that we have in America is, and this is important when we talk about our regulation. Our regulation is not based, like, for example, in Europe or Asia, which is a government-down system of regulation. It is actually a self-regulatory system where you have private regulation. Like FINRA is a private regulator. It's not a government regulator. And the other thing, when I was at the SEC, I was one of 2,000 employees. That included assistants, that included people in the copy room, that included our office administrators. So when you're looking at what we put into our regulatory structure, not as much as they do in other countries. And I think part of the problem that we have in America is that we rely upon the system of private regulation. So it's hard to come down on some of these bankers. It's hard to come down on some of the banks. I'm only giving the argument. I'm not saying I agree with it, okay? It's hard to come down on them because the counter argument is If you do that, you will have what they had back in the 1930s, 1929, 30s, a run on the banks because nobody would trust them. And that's part of the problem. Again, not agreeing with it. I'm just saying that's the principle.
That's okay. Let them run on the banks and come and join us over in crypto. I mean, I think there should be a run on the banks. If we're going to talk about free market ingenuity and policy, let them all go under. Yeah, people will get hurt, but people get hurt. And then they learn. It's like if you touch a hot stove, you recoil immediately. Why? Because it burns. Not because it feels nice.
Except if you're that superhero in the new movie, it doesn't feel
so
pain.
let people get burned. Let them. And they'll learn. But, look, we can go into potential solutions. Like one of the things that I think has been proposed is that instead of banks paying some measly little sum, they get 20% of the revenue for the next 5 years of their business off the top line gets shaved off in fines. Of course, and there are implications for that feed down into the bottom line. People get fired, they lose talent, goes elsewhere, and they should lose talent, and it should go elsewhere. That's, if you look at Ray Dalio's book, he asks the question in his book, if a hyena eats a sickly baby, gazelle, is that a bad thing? Or is that just nature? Is nature taking its course? The hyena is surviving. It is extricating from that group of gazelle a sickly, wounded individual, thereby creating a stronger...
Well, that's pure Darwinism.
Yeah,
That's
it is
what
to a certain degree. But, and why shouldn't... I find one of the most interesting things about finance, as a professional who's been marinating in it for my entire professional life, everybody talks about free market economics. They all talk about, I'll pay more taxes in exchange for less regulation and all this other nonsense. And then the moment they aren't regulated and it all goes belly up, they run to the government. Well, where's the government? Why aren't you helping us? And then they get bailed out.
Right.
And so there's no consequences. So maybe the consequence should be that people come to the blockchain. They start a new financial infrastructure that is, separate from the legacy financial infrastructure, and let that slowly die out. And it will over the next, 50 years or so. But, we have in our culture this suppurating fissure where people don't trust the government, but at the moment something goes wrong, they run in and say, where is my government?
There is a lot of trust of banks. People do trust their local banks. People
also trust their Congress people too.
Yeah.
That's fascinating to me. They hate Congress, but they trust their congressperson.
The problem here with how fast it's moving, you've got fake investment websites.
Mm-hmm.
I've been told by an investigator for $80 a month, you can get an entire phishing kit on the dark web to create a fake investment website, soup to nuts. These websites close, they come and close within 30 days or 2 months, they go elsewhere. And, old and young are vulnerable. You've got voice cloning, which is this is getting off, but that's an incredible problem. Wasn't there a fake investment promotion by Keanu Reeves at one point, which was not him? I've been told by investigators that voice cloning is now down to about 5 to 10 words. So if crooks have that in your voice, they can create a whole vocabulary for you.
Yep.
And kids on social media, man, what they're giving out and their voices all the time and everywhere, and their parents on Facebook, Johnny just turned 12 and here we are at this restaurant. They're just giving away so much.
I laugh when people get all upset that the Chinese are taking, like TikTok. They're using TikTok. They're the least of the concerns. Yeah. It's these people that Richard's talking about.
This is the biggest generational transfer of wealth, I think, in history happening now, like the baby boomers to the young ones. And so those older people are very vulnerable. They're online now. A lot of them got online in the pandemic, so they're extremely vulnerable. And the young people they don't have the money.
Right.
So they're getting robbed of 1,000 here, 10,000 there. but it's bad. I think everybody knows. I have a young relative who got scammed out of $12,000 on the Amazon FTC fraud that you've written about. And I have an aunt who got scammed out of $2,000, Adele's sister, because a phone call came saying, "Listen, Zach's in jail. He was arrested. It's the bail we need. I can't reach Andy." See, Andy's Zach's father. And if a fraudster knows the whole family tree, then the person's in shock and they send money. And this is a little off the point of investment scams, but you do have that happening. You've got the pig butchering.
Butchering,
which starts as a romance scam, but invariably these criminals want you to invest in something. It's crypto, and then they run off. I have a relative who I've been trying to keep from being scammed on the romance scams. She sends me a note. Can you look into this guy? It doesn't take long, right? I mean, Bart, we know how long it takes to. And I said, this guy's been arrested in 6 states, including impersonation. He's got 12 names. And he says, well, and he's 70, not 60. Well, I don't care about that. I'm going to keep, I like him. And
well, it's part of the idea.
Pig butchering.
Yeah, pig butchering.
Chinese way, like you're luring them in.
To butcher them. But it's like fattening them up and then butchering. But it's like what Nick said. We've gotten to this siloed mentality as a society. Some of it I frankly don't blame COVID for everything, because it was happening before COVID, where people are so invested in the technology that they're losing a lot of the social connections that they once had, and that's what's happening.
But to get back to your question, Alex, because we have transgressed a little bit. Look, radical transparency and accountability. That's the competitive edge in the new financial system, the blockchain system.
And then, Ernie, we've already started talking about it a little bit, but how have regulators, the SEC, DOJ, adapted their enforcement approaches since Madoff, particularly when dealing with fast-moving digital schemes, kind of like what we've been discussing just now?
There has been a radical change. The prior administration, both under President Obama and, you're going to laugh when I say this, even under the first Trump administration and President Biden, it was more of a regulatory issue. It was more of a registration. He's now the acting U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. Jay Clayton believed, and I'm sure, I don't know, maybe he'll deny it now, although it's all over the internet, okay? He was a strong believer that much of the digital asset space should be regulated under the securities rubric. And that was followed by Gary Gensler, his successor under the Biden administration. Now we have something completely different. We have an administration that views everything in the prism. I kind of like to call it strict constructionalists, like that famous legal, aspect where they want to go back to what the founders said. You know what I'm saying? And it's kind of like similar now what we have here. They are looking at exactly what we're talking about, on this panel. They're looking at traditional evidence of fraud. They're looking at Ponzi schemes. They're looking at pump and dump schemes, all involving digital assets. And I suppose time will tell. And to their credit, they have brought several cases in the crypto space, in the digital asset space, that deal with this type of fraud.
And each agency seems to have its own unit. The SEC has its own virtual fraud crime unit. The FBI has.
It changed a little bit. The FBI does. Yeah. The DOJ, the same thing. The DOJ is also it's sort of like it's all been like one shift into that particular area.
Yeah. I mean, the blockchain tech, though. I mean, look, traditional banking, you could subpoena a bank account. You had know your customer. But now it's more public in one way, right? Because the digital chain is there. You've got to follow the nodes, right?
Yes.
The wallets and nodes. But then you've got law enforcement has this problem of all these things called mixers and tumblers. More jargon, which is like what crooks use to divert the invisible chain.
Yeah, but a translation of a mixer in shall we say yesteryear's parlance is a casino. Think about it. If I want to launder money,
Yeah, okay.
that's why the mob owns so many casinos. They just go and mix all the money in with the casino money, and voila, out it comes, nice and laundered for you.
Who owns the nodes?
You look. It's a very good point, and but I do want to defend the industry a little bit here. There are people who are trying to solve for this, and look, for instance, it's no longer untraceable. The blockchain, that's a myth. That myth has been
Take a long time.
Absolutely, yes, and that is actually something I put down in one of my other answers.
A lot of resources.
Layering of multiple different smart contracts and.
But do you remember when we first started, Rich, where you have to do like the blue sheets and everything and track securities transactions? They used to close down the New York Stock Exchange for a day, back in the 60s and early 70s, just to catch up on the paperwork. So I'm not.
Look, like I said moments ago, regulation has to evolve. I don't know if the current model of self-regulation is going to be effective. I think there needs to be, I put here, decentralized markets require programmable accountability. Now, that's where we come into the ZK proofs, right? What is a ZK proof? It's a zero knowledge proof. The idea is that you create a smart contract and you say, okay, well, we're going to check the person's due diligence. We're going to see if Alex Ursino really is who she says she is. So they put her through a KYC process or something similar. And then they use the blockchain technology to stamp, yes, Alex is the person she says she's not married to Osama bin Laden or anything like that, right? So I know. But the point still stands, right? So, but therein is another problem, and this gets to the regulators, FinCEN as well, all of them. They will not allow a ZK proof to suffice. They want to know every step in the decision DNA that, oh, well, why did you approve Alex? Well, because we put her through, she gave us her passport, she proved her address, we did this, we did that, and then we sent them. So they want to know all of that. They also want to know why we deny someone. That can't be done with zero knowledge, because the idea is Alex proves who she is, and there's no way to trace it. So this is the first step, an embryonic stage of where the blockchain technology can go. And it will always be used for malfeasance. Every sword has two edges, right? So there will always be people who do it legitimately. And trust me, it's a hard slog.
Where the U.S. is behind. Like in the UK, where you're from, I think there's a new rule that in the past, if you lost money to crypto the bank said, too bad, you're stupid. But I think there's now a rule 50-50. Sender bank, receiver bank are liable in these scams.
I've lived in the United States now for almost 25 years.
In Australia, they're actually going further and holding the social media platforms accountable as well financially. So that's evolving.
Before, just as a caveat, just for one moment, I actually love the blockchain. I'm not talking about the digital asset part to it. That's what we're talking about here. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The blockchain technology, this node technology, is being used by some of the largest corporations in the world, including some of the governments of the world, including our government. Because as, for example, it is perfect to manage supply chains. It's perfect to manage various, like if you're Walmart uses the blockchain to manage like all of its stores. Costco does as well too. So let's not throw the technology out.
Well, it's going to replace transfer agents and settlement agents entirely, because you have a 24-hour immutable concatenate public ledger, and you can send money anywhere, anytime. Why do I need a settlement agent?
Yeah. And like the government was like very much trying to lower the settlement time for certain transactions. With the blockchain, it could be zero.
It is.
Zero. Yeah.
In fact, one of the discussions we're having with one of our partners right now is, in fact, the thing that's slowing us down in settling with one of our partner exchanges is gas fees.
Yes.
That's it. We can transfer billions sometimes for pennies on the dollar, in seconds. Alternatively, sometimes it costs a hell of a lot of money. It all depends on gas fees and how clogged up the network is. And then what you do is then you implement rather than T+1 or T+2 or T0, we have T120 minutes. So if the gas fees aren't good at the time we want to make the transfer, we wait 120 minutes or at any time during that 120-minute period. The moment the gas fees lighten up, bang, we send the money. We don't need a bank. We don't need the Fed to intervene. We don't need any of it.
And we're charging a fee for that.
We do charge a fee for that. Yes.
How much do I need to invest with you?
I think we're looking for what, 50 million?
Maybe half my net worth? Or...
Yeah. And don't tell anyone we had this conversation. Yeah, gas fee. So what's a fee when you send a wire? It's a bank fee. So this is something that I think Justin and I were talking about in the conference room. Don't be bamboozled by jargon. The lexicon of this industry is just that. It's just different names for things. For example, if I say to you, you give me your money and I will put it into this particular investment vehicle, and you will get a yield on that. Well, that's just a fixed income security. Yeah. That's no different than a bond. But we call it staking. You stake your assets, and you'll earn a yield. And they say, oh, but the yield changes every day. Okay, well, that's a floating rate security that changes daily. There's no difference. It's just a floating rate bond. The difference is in the technology itself, in the sense that they use your tokens to verify, transactions on the blockchain, and that's how they pay you in that yield. But it's no different. Yeah, here we go, liquid staking.
I think we all in this room could probably start talking about liquid staking at this point. I do want to open it up to questions. So if you're online, please submit something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no.
So a lot of the Madoff fraud was driven by what they term the affinity fraud.
Yes.
Social circles, religious institutions,
yes,
golf clubs, country clubs, etc. So segue to the digital realm now, where so much of this is in person, like so much else on the internet is very in person. Now, does this new paradigm make it more or less conducive to fraud compared to, say, the affinity fraud of the Madoff?
The question is,
I'm told that there are affinity frauds and digital investment frauds all the time. I haven't looked into it, but investigators have told me that continues. It's one thing to get people in church groups, church investment clubs, just scams.
Yeah, it's just they use social media, Discord groups.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting about your question is we look at the scale of Madoff, right? $100 billion in today's currency. And it took him 50 years to really, he did it over 50 years. We have digital asset scams that take place in seconds. What's the difference in scale if I can infiltrate a whole lot of people's wallets, a million people's wallets, and in under 5 seconds withdraw all the money from it? It's still theft, right? It's just different technology behind it. That's all. I mean, I'm not sure if I quite answered your question there, but to sort of, with regards to the blockchain, the soil is no more fertile than it is for the legacy markets. It's just the scale is probably larger and more rapid.
And the speed.
Yeah, that's it. It's the only difference.
Hi, I just wanted to harken back to two things on the SEC enforcement.
Yeah.
As you guys have mentioned, the SEC is not there to stop you from making stupid mistakes, but it is there to protect investors, and it is a federally mandated regulatory agency. It's not self-regulated. It is the man, right? They investigated Madoff what? 5, 6, 7 times? So that myth that Nick is talking about, that jargon, must be working in some respects, with the government's approval, right? All the SEC had to do was ask for Madoff's custodial accounts, and they would have found nothing. That they didn't do that. So when it comes to the digital asset, all enforcement, for the most part, I do take your point that for the most part, they are looking at fraudulent cases right now, unicorn.
Yep.
But for the most part, they basically wiped out all of the regulation by enforcement cases that are out there,
Yep.
which is freeing up people to do all sorts of shenanigans. How do you, if you can't trust the government anymore? I don't necessarily believe in crypto the way Nick does. Sorry, I think you're using a lot of the token words that you're using those.
I'm bamboozling you. Yeah.
Tokenization, mutability, all that. And so I'm trying to figure out where is the future if you can't trust the government. There is, areas of deep division within the digital space, right? There's a lot of space to commit fraud. Where do you go from here?
Yeah, I do want to talk a little bit about, you also, it's funny because Rich mentioned him. Arthur Levitt was very good friends with Bernie Madoff. Exactly. Bernie Madoff was, Bernie Madoff was the chairman of the board of the NASD.
A titular.
Okay, all right. But what I will say, I do want to address this. Because I think it's a very important question as to what happened with the regulators. Why didn't they ask for his custodial records? Why didn't they do that? My former boss at the SEC was a guy by the name of Dick Walker, who I absolutely think he's one of the greatest people in the world. On the day that Madoff broke, okay? The day that Madoff broke, Dick was being honored by the New York County Lawyers Association with an award, and I was a board member of the New York County Lawyers Association at the time, and we had our annual dinner at the Waldorf, and we're in a private room where they're having a cocktail reception, and I walk in, and there's Dick surrounded by about 6 or 7 people, and he sees me. Dick Walker's a tall guy like me. He sees me, and he's like motioning, come. So I walk over to him. He says, "Hello, Ernie, how are you?" First words out of Dick's mouth were, "Ernie, were you with us when we investigated Madoff?" And I go, "No, Dick, I came right after the investigation was closed." The issue that happened with that investigation, and I'm on record as saying this, the problem was, rightly or wrongly, I personally am not a big fan of this, okay? Because I think when you're a regulator, you should open your mouth and say something, okay? The problem why was because the process, and this is what concerns me about the current administration and where they're going with all of this, okay, was that they did not have jurisdiction to investigate that particular item of Madoff's business. And what happened is that this was a regulatory graveyard, or not graveyard, but a regulatory lapse, where the SEC claimed, and by the way, it was borne out by the Inspector General's report. It was a legitimate concern that they had that they could not get involved in that type of investigation. They were investigating Madoff's broker-dealer operation, not the other part, which wasn't regulated, which wasn't registered, a registered entity. And they felt that they couldn't do it. Now, here's where this breaks up, okay? What the SEC was investigating at that time was the broker-dealer and 2 of Madoff's brokers at Comet, okay? And they were being investigated for what? For investigating in Madoff's scheme. It wasn't called the scheme at the time, but they weren't doing that. And what did Madoff do? Madoff immediately said, "They're bad. Go after them. Fine us. We'll take the hit." And that's what he did. And they closed it up. He took the punishment and he went further. And that's what happened.
Why did the SEC take? Okay, I'm sorry.
No, yeah.
Why did the SEC take Bernie's?
I don't think they took his word for it. I think that was an acknowledgement, an admission of the wrongdoing that happened. And this is what they were investigating at the time. They lined up, they did it, they closed it. They did not go the next step further. They didn't go further because in their minds, and like I said, it was borne out by the Inspector General's report, They did not go the next step because there was serious questions of whether they actually had jurisdiction.
Moving on to the digital side of it, though,
right?
Which I think is interesting. Everything that they had been doing to date, this so-called regulation by
yep,
not necessarily supported that, but a lot of what they were doing was legit. Right?
Yes,
cases that they were bringing were not illegitimate. They did have Howey issues. All
yep,
and they're all securities, we all know, right? And so to remove that after 20 years after Bernie, after you're back to the
you're preaching to the choir, because even Hester Peace has come out. She's called the godmother. She's an SEC commissioner. She's called the godmother of crypto. Okay, even she over the summer gave a speech where she said, "Not so fast. Many of these digital assets are in fact securities. Don't throw out the Howey test." So the problem is that I don't. And this is unsatisfying. It's an unsatisfying answer, okay? I'm not sure they know how this is all going to play out. They don't. Yeah, exactly. Nick, how would you stop it?
No, and look at the budgets. I mean, my God, the SEC budget is about $3 billion a year. And if you know how many companies and investment advisors they have to oversee, and it barely goes up. And with this whole crypto fraud explosion, it's Democrats and Republicans who have basically clipped their wings year after year. They have to approve their budget on an annual basis. You can't plan ahead. If they have a special crypto group, they may not be able to fund it the next year. I mean, they generate $5 billion a year, so it's not costing taxpayers anything, and they're only getting $3 billion. You've got to triple that budget and do it correctly, I think, if you're going to. Otherwise, you're going to lose the crypto battle in terms of the SEC. How not?
Well, I think there's the added difficulty in jurisdiction and enforceability. Jurisdiction and enforceability. How do you enforce? If I commit a Ponzi from the Seychelles, which is where a lot of them are coming out of, by the way, how do you enforce that against me as the SEC? How do you stop me from doing that?
Well, if you have a U.S. person involved, right, the SEC,
maybe.
They go after them, right? But the Seychelles is going to be jacked with a computer.
I think there's a new model, and I don't want to talk too much about it because it is part of our business model, and Ernie is aware of it, so I have to keep that a little under wraps. But I think there is a new model for it, to be honest. And I've said this to Ernie, and I'll say it here. Unfortunately, that which does not bend with nature will be broken by it, right? So the SEC and FINRA and the CFTC, all of them, are going to have to take they're going to actually have to come to the table. They can't just be the umpire on the football team calling out problems when they see them, and giving a penalty every time somebody does something naughty. They actually now have to get into the game. And they may have to pass regulation whereby they actually say, if you are coding these smart contracts, you have to code, you are a fiduciary in them, right? And so we have to instill this concept of fiduciary responsibility in the very people who are writing the programmatic language of the new financial system. How do you do that in a group of people that are inculcated in the idea that they are lauded for actually meandering around regulation? How do you change that mindset?
Just shifting topics for a second. The history of the 21st century is basically that the regulation will only follow the standards. So when we started in 2000, if we remember Global Crossing, remember Enron, remember that. What did that rise? So that gave rise to the internal controls over financial reporting, where CEOs had to sign off on the financial statements. And then we come along in 2008. What happened? Dodd-Frank. So nothing's going to happen until whatever we're talking about blows up.
Yeah.
And it's only when it blows up that we really understand what was behind it. Because even now, at the time, people the people who were making money and producing subprime, they didn't understand the subprime risk, and they admit that. And I think it's clear that today with crypto and AI, even if you read Anthropic's paper, there are things going on with AI. The producers of AI and the hyperscalers admit they don't understand. And I'm not sure it's ever going to be able to understand it until something blows up. And when it blows up, it's not going to be your relatives that get hurt. It's going to be more than that. And you're going to be sure that there will be institutional global level institutions that will be involved, that will lose money. And we're all going to look back in hindsight and say, yeah, this is another tulip bulb. But until that happens, the natural tension between regulation and innovation, which right now the pendulum has swung towards innovation, is always going to be there. And so how do we balance that? It's very difficult to figure out, ex ante.
Well, if I may.
Because you do want to continue to develop, like what you said, you're a big fan of the nodes and crypto and the blockchain and all that, but we don't fully understand the blockchain. The blockchain was founded on the idea there'll be thousands of nodes worldwide. The private blockchains are limited to a handful of nodes. So what are the vulnerabilities of using only a handful of nodes? I mean, nobody knows that until there's a big scandal and a major bank loses a fortune. Then you'll see the next version of Dodd-Frank come out, because it's only then, as you're saying, that we don't fully understand today's problems with yesterday's. But the history of the 20th and 21st century is when options and derivatives came out, you could make the same argument. Yeah. What kind of, we're going to apply Howey to options and derivatives? It's people just don't understand it until something like the scandal in the 90s that happened with Merriwood. All of a sudden, you get regulations now on options and clearinghouses and central clearinghouses to ensure that safety. So I agree that it's very hard to, ex ante, come up with regulations before the innovation's finished, because we don't really know, and we don't really fully understand what all the vulnerabilities are. And until that happens, I don't think you're going to get a lot of regulatory safety.
Yeah, there was an announcement, just one thing, and then Nick wants to jump in. There was an announcement this morning that crypto firms, primarily ETFs that deal in cryptos, are the biggest repo users, treasury repo users, to the tune of $13 billion. And, that is an indication of exactly what you're saying. Whether it could be pulled back, who knows? But,
Yeah, and finally, I wonder if people understand the irony of the blockchain was supposed to eliminate intermediaries. Now everybody's rushing to an intermediary blockchain provider or crypto provider because they don't want to handle the 100 character password in order to ensure the safety of it. It's just the irony is the irony being lost on people that they want to go back to a custodian, basically, which was the whole point of having the blockchain, was not to have a custodian.
Yes, trustless. That's the word that's bandied about in the industry. It's a trust. You're absolutely right. But I would also argue that I think we have had that bomb explode in the digital asset space. I don't think anyone would think that FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried was something to sort of dust away to the side. That was enormous. But nothing's been done. In fact, to this, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, sir, but to your point, as we're going through the regulatory process right now, FINRA is adamant. We've told them, look, we will build an entire system for you of compliance. It will give you full transparency into everything. And they have told us, we don't want to know anything about your non-US crypto. I'm like, well, that's all of the crypto industry. They're not US registered securities. We don't want any part of it. We don't want to know. Maybe we'll look at the trading systems, but that's a maybe. They've told us in every single meeting, if it's not US registered, and it's not it's not happening in the United States on a U.S. registered exchange, we're not interested.
And I think what Nick is saying is that they've offered.
Yeah, we've offered,
and FINRA has said no.
At the SEC, whether it's OC or the Department of Examinations, they really don't care about non-U.S. investors, right? Even though you could argue that in the letter of the law they should be, because if there's an international sanction, it could come back to the registration with the SEC, but they never enforce that.
But the Division of Enforcement is constantly criticized when they try to go overseas to stop fraud.
But it doesn't have to. 60% of our user base is American, and they're all trading non-US registered digital assets. they're not interested in.
Well, that raises the question too about private markets now, right? With the whole issue of allowing retailers to come into this wonderful world of private markets,
Yeah.
where you're going to be able to take advantage where all the big guys are. How's that going to turn out?
Well, they're going to be squashed. That's what's. I mean, that's just being honest.
Democratization
Yes.
of private equity.
Everybody loves that word, democratization.
Yeah.
It makes me
We can all
cringe.
lose money together.
Yeah, there we go. But that's no different than the great financial crisis. We all lost money together there. Yeah.
Well, I want to circle back to the book, back to Rich. It's been an exciting conversation.
Wait, question. Just a quick point to your point earlier. I think you touched upon it. So, there is going to be a day of that. But the problem is the sophisticated investors, they're not the ones taking over. You look at the 2008 crisis, who among the biggest offenders had any serious repercussions, much less jail time. Some of them actually deserved it. So it's going to be John Q. investor as opposed to sophisticates, and that's the problem. Those are the ones. The average investors, so it's democratization. They're the ones that are.
Although Bear Stearns and Lehman were considered pretty sophisticated at that
That
time.
is true. That is true. But in terms of high-level executives and such, fall out after the dust settled, it was pretty light in the overall scheme of things. So the problem is the average investors get hurt, and you can't necessarily be cavalier about that. Just say, okay, if we get hurt, then we realize that, let's just move on. Just questions. But that's just a comment.
No. You're absolutely right. But I also do want to point out there were major institutional investors that were seriously injured by FTX. There's a very, very serious trader. He started a fund called Ikagai, and his name escapes me presently. But he had hundreds of millions of dollars. He was formerly, with Cohen, I think at SAS or 72 or whatever it was called. And he got wiped out. Hundreds of millions lost, and he is now waiting to get callbacks.
It wasn't a Ponzi.
No, that wasn't. Well, it was a. No, you're right. In the technical sense, it wasn't a Ponzi. Yeah.
So we don't have any online questions, only compliments. So we're doing a great job. But Rich, I want to give you the final word. No pun intended.
Before I do that, I want to say there is a bright spot. As of last year, 26 U.S. There is a bright spot. As of last year, 26 U.S. states require financial literacy classes for high school students to graduate. And some of them require that they learn how to avoid scams. So that's huge. And by the way, I caught a Ponzi scheme online. I'm going to write about it. I printed out the website. An investigator tells me, yeah, it's a Ponzi. It's remarkable. 255% returns. And it's filled with emojis. I mean, who are they targeting? There's like an arm fist. There's a smiley face. The professor is going to conduct another research for us. The name of the professor doesn't exist. I mean, it's just fun stuff. Horrible stuff. Anyway, go on.
Well, your second final word. Circling back to the audio we heard at the beginning. Burning question. Was Bernie a psychopath or a sociopath?
Oh, God. Well, since I have my medical degree as of last week, it's funny because I talked about that with Bernie. Bernie actually, when I was in prison with him, he said, am I a sociopath?
Talk about he was not in prison. He was visiting him.
Visiting. Bernie said, am I a sociopath? He said, I keep reading that I may be a sociopath. I asked my shrink, am I a sociopath? And I said, well, what did she say? She said, I'm not. What did she say you are? And he said, I'm a compartmentalizer. Like everyone else, a compartmentalizer. So I actually took the question to some FBI experts who were in the, the famous Mindhunter Center, like that show, the Behavioral Center in Washington, where they studied serial killers. And they said they look at my transcripts and tell me when he's lying, which was really cool. And I asked one of them, what is he? And these days, everyone's reluctant to give a diagnosis, but one of them said, without a doubt, he's a social predator. That's the label that he gave him. So, yeah.
All right. Well, this was a great discussion. I want to thank you all for being here, either physically or virtually. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Very much.
Thank you.